I learned to drive stick shift at a pretty late point in time, I suppose. Now, I know that by today's standards, the vast majority of people don't even learn to drive stick shift. And in reality, it's kind of an outdated skill, right? Electric vehicles don't have it. The world is moving in that direction, albeit, somewhat slowly. So there's not a huge need for it. But when I was growing up, there was still a decent number of stick shifts around. I wouldn't bump into them super frequently, when using friends' cars and things, but they were out there. My parents never owned or drove a stick shift car in my lifetime. Evidently, my dad did drive stick shift back when he was driving at a younger age, but the whole time, at least, unless he had it when I was, unless he had one when I was, whatever, a year or two old, my entire lifetime, they were automatic cars. I learned to drive on an automatic car. At no point did I pick up stick shift in my learning to drive phase of things. Where I eventually did learn to drive stick, and I'm using learn in pretty big quotation marks right here, but eventually I started working at a trucking company. Not as a trucker, but as originally they brought me in as kind of like a landscaper, groundskeeper, odd job kind of person. And then eventually I ended up being something of a mechanic there as well. But there were yard trucks, because the yard end to end was, I don't know exactly how long, but at least half a mile if you wanted to go from one end to the other or something like that, maybe a little more. So, and you'd have to cart things around and whatever. So they had a couple of yard trucks, a couple old pickup trucks, one of which was a stick shift. Eventually, the day came to pass where the automatic yard truck was broken down or something. And I had to go pick something up where I needed a truck for the yard. And so they were like, well, go hop in the white truck, which was a manual vehicle. Go hop in the white truck and go grab it. So this was not the type of culture where you would tell the other guys like, oh, I don't know how to drive stick, right? That was not how this went down. So I was like, sure. And I went and I hopped in, and I had I don't know where I picked it up, but I had some very basic concept of what it meant to drive stick. And what it basically came down to in my head was, you had this clutch pedal over on the left, you had your regular accelerator, and in some way you had to balance those things in order to get moving. I had no real concept of how to shift gears or when. That didn't really matter on the yard because you really weren't leaving the first or second gear anyway. But to get the truck moving, that was my general idea, was like, oh, I'm going to give it some gas and kind of let off on the clutch a little bit, and we're just going to see where that goes. So I proceeded to stall over and over and over again, eventually learning that the emergency brake was on. But anyway, that's sort of my first introduction to these things. And as I stayed there for a few years, I got a little bit better with that. Again, I never took it out on a road or anything, but around the yard, I could function driving a stick shift vehicle. I also got a little bit used to occasionally driving the big rig trucks around the yard as well, which was a kind of a different experience. Anyway, years later, when I was staring down no longer working at the shop, which was a job that I very much enjoyed doing in the summers, I was looking to get a project vehicle. So that, because I was kind of entering a world where it was unlikely I was going to be doing a bunch of mechanical work as at the time I was working through a psychology master's degree or something. So I was like, I want a project truck. I want to be able to have something mechanical that I can kind of mess around with and whatever. So I ended up buying not an old, but a late 80s Ford Bronco that was also stick shift. I had to go out and pick this vehicle up from the guy I was buying it from. I hadn't driven stick on a road before, so I took a buddy with me, and I drove around this guy's neighborhood a few times just to get a feel for it. Then I got out on the road, and I started driving, and like it went reasonably well. I only stalled once or twice. I did get stuck on a big hill. That was that was an interesting experience. Like in the rain, very steep hill. Just getting used to this vehicle. Haven't really driven stick before on a road, but we got through it. If you've ever driven a late 80s Ford Bronco or F-150, because they're about the same, they're very similar in terms of how they behave. The first couple of gears you really kind of pound through. I learned years later actually that what I thought was first gear was actually like a rock crawling granny gear kind of thing for like off-roading purposes. But the whole time I owned the truck, I treated it as first gear. So you would be in first gear for like a quarter of a second off of like a stoplight. And then you'd be into second. Second didn't last very long. You'd be into third. And you kind of like, because of how much this engine roared as it got anywhere near even like 2,500 RPM, like it was a loud V8 engine. And the vehicle itself was so bare bones that you heard everything, right? So when you would, coming off of automatic transmissions, you know, they're a good bit quieter and they shift you at often much lower RPMs. I would get up to 2,500 RPM and I would slam into the next gear because I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to break this engine. Looking back, that was not the case. Like I could have definitely taken that engine much, much higher in my shifts. It would have been fine. But at the time, that was just, you know, learning to do it basically. So I really got into the habit of really just slamming through gears, right? I don't mean like aggressively in terms of knocking the gears around. Like I wasn't damaging the gears. I just mean I was very quickly shifting through them, right? It would be 1, 2, 3, 4. Like I would almost race to get myself into fourth gear, particularly around town. And then there was a fifth gear, like an overdrive gear for if you ever went on the highway with it. But generally around town, you didn't ever go into the fifth. You just sit in 4. And so I got used to getting to fourth gear as quickly as possible. The reasons for this were really, one, it was comfortable to coast in. Gears 1 and 2, forget about it. But even gear 3, if you tried to coast in that, it felt like your car was dragging. Like it felt like there was resistance, right? If you let off if you're on the gas and you're moving forward and you're accelerating, it felt fine. But as soon as you started coming off the gas, it felt like if for those of you who have driven a stick shift car, the lower gears feel like they are resisting you if you try to coast in them, particularly at any kind of RPM. So fourth was a comfortable coasting gear. Like it felt comfortable to take my foot off of the gas. I could kind of coast around in it, that sort of thing. So I would often almost race to get into fourth gear. I had that truck for, 2, 3, 4 years, something like that. Eventually it rusted out from under me. I let it sit too long. I missed that truck. I really loved that truck. But I let it sit for too long outside of a garage. It just kind of rusted out. It was going to probably cost thousands and thousands of dollars to get it back on the road. So I scrapped it. Fast forward to 2022. The new Ford Bronco has been released as of 2021. So I go out in search of a stick shift new Bronco, the 6th generation Bronco. But they looked really cool, but I wanted to drive one, wanted to check it out. Found one at a dealership in stick, bought it. And then as I started driving it, now it shifted very differently, right? It still felt good, but it definitely was a very different shifting experience than something from 89. Things have progressed a long way since then. The gears didn't drag as much. Like obviously, gear 1 and even gear 2 to a certain extent, but by the time you got to the 3rd gear, you could comfortably kind of coast around a little bit in 3rd. And 4th was very comfortable. And these it's actually a 7-speed manual. So, but typically around town, you're usually in gears 1 through 4, sometimes 1 through 5, right? But by the time you're in 3rd gear, if you're, on some curvy roads and whatever, it was a comfortable way to kind of coast around. The more I've driven with this truck, or with this type, the new Bronco in stick, the more I grew to appreciate each gear. maybe after first gear, because first gear is just like, let's get off the stoplight or whatever. But all the rest of them kind of have their place, which was something that, so then I look back at my old one and I wonder to myself, did I need to pound through those gears to get to fourth? Probably not. Like, I'm betting I could have spent a lot more comfortable time in gears, at least gear 3. I didn't need to feel the rush to get to 4 all the time. And it just kind of gets me thinking a little bit. And this is a long diatribe about driving a stick shift car, but it gets me thinking about how we live our lives. And I've started to just kind of have this phrase in the back of my head. And it's, enjoy the gear you're in. You're in life. There are many gears, right? And they mean all sorts of different things. And, forgive the metaphor here, but, sometimes you're coming up through school. Sometimes you have no job and no income and you want a job. And other times you have a job, but you hate it and you want to leave it. And sometimes you're not working, but you don't really want to be working, but you want to do some other stuff. And sometimes you're short on money and sometimes you have money. And sometimes you live here and sometimes you live there. And sometimes you have these people in your life and sometimes you have other people in your life. To one extent or another, I imagine most people can frame this in a way that makes sense within the context of their life. And so often, speaking for myself at least, if I know where I'm trying to get, if I know that my goal is to, achieve a degree and get a job, I rush through the steps that get me to the end point. I'm so focused on that end point, and I think societally we are taught to do this. You're taught that there's some end goal that you should be always pushing towards. And so if you're trying to get there, you're never going to appreciate the things that you're doing before you get there, or the precursors or the prerequisites to get there. Because they are their own phases. They're their own gears. What would it be like to really enjoy every step of the way getting to wherever you're trying to go? Maybe you want to end up with a family and a kid, or, like a wife, kid, family kind of situation. Maybe that's where you're trying to go. But to get there might be school and meeting someone and meeting different people and dating one or another, and, maybe periods of time where you're not dating anybody, and, maybe there's a period of time where you're married, but you're not going to have the kid yet. And those are all really good gears to appreciate. And I think you can take that with anything, right? Take it professionally. It's great to want to be the executive who oversees everything, but leading up to that, there's a whole collection of gears that you go through to learn the skills that eventually will make you good at that. Whereas if you rush it, if you just shoot for it, if you don't appreciate anything, and you just blow through it, you end up just a hollow, empty suit in the end, right? And then you might get there and find that you don't like it anyway. And that's usually the worst case, is when you get to the thing you've been rushing to go to, and it's not what you thought it was cracked up to be. And you realize that you skipped all the gears along the way or rushed through them. So this is my reminder, framed in a way that makes sense to me. It's not a lot different than saying appreciate the moment or live in the moment or whatever. But to me, it's a little different. It's not just live in the moment, but identify what phase, what gear you are in, and enjoy that gear until it's time to naturally shift to the next one. Don't just rush to get to the end of the box.